This is the Nebraska Broadcasters Association History Project. It's a series of video interviews with people who have impacted Nebraska broadcasting for decades. Today we're at the studios of UNO Television in Omaha. I'm Neil Nelkin for the NBA. In the history of Nebraska broadcasting, there have been certain people who have had an overly large influence on the medium and on the people who populate the medium. Our guest today is one of those people. Ann Shannon has been able to guide the broadcast news media both nationally, regionally, and locally through her position as news director at Omaha's award-winning Ketv Newswatch 7. Also, from her role as part of the ABC Television News Advisory Board and her part in the Hearst Television Organization. Ann has mentored countless broadcast people who have gone on to successful careers both in broadcasting and outside of the medium. Her employees speak of her in very grateful, almost reverent tones. She's recently announced her retirement. We welcome Ann Shannon of Ketv Newswatch 7.
Thank you, Neil. That was very nice.
Well, let's talk about Ann now that you're nearing retirement as we record this in 2018. Your beginnings. How'd you get started, and why did you get started in this crazy business?
Well, this is really crazy, but I'm back to where it all started tonight. It's coming to an end next week, and I'm here where it started. I attended college at UNO, and I have to laugh sometimes because I changed my major so many times that they suggested perhaps I wanted to take some assessment testing, which I did, and the results were kind of what you would expect, an interest in everything, but not enough in any one thing to make a career out of it. I have to tell you, that's a little disheartening, and then I started thinking about it. That defines what I do as a journalist. So I decided, I met some kids who were in a broadcasting track, and they wanted to interview me for a program that they were putting together, much like this one here. And the minute I walked in the studio, I was bitten by the bug, and I got an internship at KMTV before I finished college. And from the minute I walked into a television newsroom, I knew I didn't want to work anyplace else. I just knew it.
Where had you been working prior to that?
Well, I worked at Northwestern Bell as a long-distance telephone operator. I started there in college or actually in high school when I was 16. It was a great job. You had benefits and a fat salary, and I often joke that it took me probably at least 5 years of working full-time in television to make what I made as a part-timer in high school at Northwestern Bell. So as my parents were really thrilled with my choice of careers, as you might imagine.
So you came to KMTV as a part-timer? Intern?
I started as an intern, and I always laugh because we still use the term today. We're going to make you a permanent part-timer. And it's like, does that mean I'm going to be permanently part-time or that I'm here permanently? What does that mean? And so for about the next 6 months, I worked part-time permanently. And I had a job offer in Sioux City, and the news director, Mark Ketv, who is a legend in broadcasting, said to me, you know, maybe it'd be better to work in Omaha than Sioux City, which I had to agree when I went up and saw the facilities in Sioux City that KMTV was a much better choice. But after about 6 months, Mark was able to put Gary Williams, who was another intern and a UNO graduate, on full-time. And so from there, newsrooms were expanding. So we saw a lot of other good people come on.
Mark was news director at KMTV at the time, locally owned television station.
Right, owned by May Broadcasting.
And you learned your craft there. What were your duties? What was your typical day like?
Well, you know, there is no typical day in news, as you well know, but I did, you know, I was never the intern gopher. The newsroom was such that you had to be a full-on participant. You had to cover the news, and you had to cover the news. If it was 60 hours a week, you did it. One of the things in my my career here at UNO and my college career is that when you change majors that many times, the year you get out, you're taking 18 credit hours, and I was working part-time at KMTV about 60 hours a week, all hours of the day and night, and I became pretty much a master at organization, just compartmentalizing everything. But we covered everything. We covered City Hall, we covered fires and tornadoes and accidents and breaking news of all types.
What year was this?
1973. I got an internship in January of 73.
And when you walked into KMTV, how many other women did you see in there?
Well, it was not very many. In fact, that was the one thing that really struck me I had gone to an all-girls high school, and I was used to a lot of women. A lot of women worked at the phone company. And I walked in there, and I remember thinking two things. And one was, where are all the girls? Because there were no women. And the second thing was, why do I have to work with all of these old people? I don't know. Everyone seemed old to me at the time.
At that perspective.
Yes, and some were 3 years older. Yeah.
What you did a lot of film work there. They were still using film, 16 millimeter film.
Right.
You learned how to cut and edit film?
Yeah, I actually learned to shoot film and cut film while I was in school, but not at the level that was expected of me at the television station. Joe McCartney, who was one of my college professors, really encouraged me to get the internship. And he said, no, whatever you do, if they ask you if you can do something, say that you can do it. And so Mark Katir asked if I could edit film, and I said, sure, I can edit film. He said, can you edit the film for the weekend newscast? So, sure, I can do that. Well, I couldn't do that, but I figured out how to do it, and while it took years off my life, I did that. And I did a lot of shooting, and in the beginning it was using a small Bell and Howell. We progressed to the CP16, which was like the Cadillac of the 16 millimeter sound on film cameras. And then in about 1979, we started getting into videotape and live, and that changed the industry tremendously.
You had told me before that in spite of the fact that there weren't many women in the newsroom, that you had experience with Ninette Beaver. Yeah,
Ninette Beaver was a reporter. Her story is interesting. She just sort of hung out at the newsroom, and she wanted to do some reporting, but she didn't want to do it full time. And Ninette was just a force. But when Charles Starkweather and Carol Ann Fugate were on their killing spree across Nebraska, Ninette and another gentleman I worked with by the name of Dave Hamer were covering that story, like dozens of others were across the state. And Ninette was the only one who could really sit for an interview with Carol Ann Fugate after they were caught. Carol Ann was young, she was 14, and I've seen the film. Ninette is sitting closer to Carol Ann than I am to you, and she's sitting right there, and it's almost like Carol Ann was a puppet sitting next to her. I don't know any other way to describe it. But Ninette ended up writing a book on Carol, visited her many times at York when she was in prison, was there when she was paroled. And interestingly enough, a few years ago, I think it was on an anniversary of their spree across the state, I called Carol Ann. I had her information. I called her, and she and Ninette were kind of on the outs. So she was having none of me trying to use Ninette to get in with her. And I did call Ninette and say, Carol Ann said some choice words about you.
I've seen that film as well, and that film is a legendary piece of video that's still shown from time to time.
It is, and what's really something that you don't see is the access that those reporters got. They chased. There was a chase into Wyoming, and other people obviously can tell the story better than I do. But there was a chase into Wyoming, and as I understand it, the sheriff out in Wyoming let the reporters and photographers into the jail cell with Charlie Starkweather to get video of him. I mean, you can't imagine that happening now. It's hard to imagine it happening then, but that's what they allowed.
KMTV, Channel 3, was the dominant television station back then at that time.
It was.
Had some legendary personalities on the station. And so everything you did was magnified by the fact that you were at the number one station in the market as a rookie.
Oh, yeah. I like to joke that Mark Gatier made some pretty good hires. Tom broke on me. But Tom was, and of course there are always these jokes, but Tom anchored I believe the morning news, and John Prescott tells this story, and I hope it's not apocryphal, but John said that when Tom Brokaw came down from South Dakota to interview for the job at KMTV, that he came down the day before and stayed in Council Bluffs because he didn't want to go into the big city at night. And so he's kind of come a long ways, I would say. I love the story, even if it's not true. But Tom started there, a lot of careers. Floyd Kalber was there, a lot of people whose names you probably wouldn't know, but got their start at KMTV. And I felt very, very fortunate to be there, and then to get a full-time job was just unbelievable because I was working with people who were legends. Dave Hamer was he was one of the founders of National Press Photographers Association. I thought everybody got to work with guys who collected piles of awards and things like that, but you find out pretty quickly not everyone does.
Mark became a mentor of yours early on and kind of inspired you to greatness.
Well, I don't know about greatness, but Mark was, he cared so much about good journalism, ethical reporting, writing. He'd sit there all night with you while you worked on a script and help you through it. I'd come back from the legislature with a notebook filled with notes, and I didn't know how to pick the real story from the extraneous story, so I just wrote everything. And Mark would sit there, it'd be midnight, and I'd still be writing. But he was great. When I became news director at KETV, I had not told a soul. I got the job, I walked down to my office, and the phone was ringing. And it was Mark on the other end, and he said, "Congratulations on your new job." And I said, "How did you know?" I hadn't told my husband. I hadn't told anybody in the newsroom. And he said, "Rosie, I still have my sources." And he never gave it up.
Good journalist, always a good journalist.
Exactly. Yeah.
How long did you stay at KMTV, and what was your position when you left?
When I left, I was a reporter. I had worked on some documentaries. I was on the assignment desk. I did basically every job in the newsroom, but primarily I left as a reporter. I left in 1985, about 12 and a half years in. And Mayor Boyle had asked me if I would come and work for him as his communications director. And I thought,
Mike Boyle, who's currently a county commissioner.
County commissioner. And I said, "Yeah, that sounds great. You know, I like covering politics." In my mind, I thought it would be really a good transition, a job that might be a little saner than news. And I realized really early on there's a big difference between covering politics and being a part of politics. So after about 10 months, I had the opportunity to go to KETV. They were looking for an night assignment manager, and I really jumped at the chance. The chief photographer, currently the chief photographer at KETV, said to me that there was an opening at KETV and I should call the new news director, which I did immediately, and I was there working 2 weeks later.
So you moved over from Channel 3 to Channel 7 and a whole lot more money.
Oh, well, I wouldn't say that.
But your first responsibilities there as a night assignment editor, what was that like?
Well, you know, the first thing I had to overcome is that I had gone to work for the competition. And I was so used to it. It took me a long time to say, quit saying, "Well, you do it this way, we do it this way." No, it was we are doing it this way. So there are a lot of, Channel 7 wasn't as aggressive about covering breaking news and things like that as KMTV had been. KM was a little late to get into the live television news. The WOWT put on a big campaign with Action Cam and talked about the joys of going live with their trucks and
they were live everywhere.
Yeah, they beat us over the head with it, quite frankly, and it was damaging to our reputation and very good for them. So but KM, once we adopted the live technology, we were very, very good at it, and we knew how to do it. And so when I got to KETV, they didn't have the same sort of philosophy that we had at KM. So it was an adjustment, but very early on, I convinced people that it's not only important, but it's fun.
You energize the news operation at Channel 7?
Well, I can be a force, you know.
More on that later. You were a night assignment editor. How did you progress at KETV to, news director, where you could really make a difference?
Well, Doug Parrott, who was the day assignment editor and somebody who'd been one of my competitors and colleagues over the years, left to take a job as KOR's communication director.
She was governor.
Right, she was governor. And so that opened up the day assignment desk, and Kirk Winkler, the man who hired me at KETV, immediately put me in that job. And then I had an opportunity to work for another television station, but Kirk, I'm a very loyal person, and I really like Kirk, and I wanted to let him know because it really was about opportunity. It was as assistant news director at another television station, and he immediately went to bat for me and made me the assistant news director. So it happened. I don't like using leverage, and that really wasn't what it was about, but I wanted him to know that I probably would go for another opportunity to move up the ladder, because at that point it did mean something to me, and I knew I'd never be a news director if I didn't take that next step.
Did you ask Mark for his advice on that?
I don't think I did. I think he would have told me, it was complicated because there were a lot of good friends involved in the whole thing, people Mark liked on the other side of the fence, and so it was a little bit complicated, but we all ended up friends in the end.
I think most people don't remember the big affiliation switch between KMTV and WOW television. That was also a part of kind of the switch in dominance from KM to WOW?
I think that the switch, as we talked about, happened a little bit earlier than that, because KMTV made the decision not to get into the live technology and not to do the promotion. WOWT, for whatever reason, decided that they were going to do that, and they were going to go full bore with live technology, breaking news, and a lot of promotion. And it really did. It kicked us in the pants and brought our ratings down. It started turning it. And then, I don't know, I had gone to KMTV or KETV by the time the affiliation switch happened, and I don't know the particulars of it, and probably only the people involved in inking the paper that made it official really know, but the suspicion was always that the ratings had something to do with it, that the NBC had a lot more clout at that particular time.
So NBC moved from Channel 3 to Channel 6, CBS moved from Channel 6 to Channel 3,
Right.
And Channel 7 maintained ABC.
That's right. We've been ABC since 1957.
1957, the year it went on the air.
Right.
And it may have had something to do with the fact that Channel 3 was locally owned, where Channel 6 was part of a big national chain. Maybe that had some financial resources available to it?
Yeah, I think that could be a part of it, too. WOWT was owned by Chronicle, and KM was, actually, I'm not sure if they had made the switch from the Maze back
From
then.
the Maze.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that.
And KE was owned by?
KE originally was owned by Kiewit and the Omaha World Herald, and but by the time I started working there, it was owned by Pulitzer Broadcasting.
Pulitzer was a big national chain with a big national reputation.
Right.
So you had resources to commit to doing real honest-to-goodness journalism.
We did, and there were really good people. Pulitzer had 9 television stations before they sold, and there were some really good people in Pulitzer, and I liked working for those folks. Ken Elkins, who was the CEO of Pulitzer Broadcasting, started as a part-time engineer at KETV way, way back, and rose to, I believe, general manager there, and then ultimately to the top job in Pulitzer.
Now, Ann Shannon is news director at KETV. What kind of responsibility fell on your shoulders? How did that feel?
terrible. I couldn't figure out why I was sitting in Kirk's office and trying to direct this. So often what happens with journalists, you're a good journalist, and so they assume that you'll make a good manager, that you're just going to make that transition. So I didn't have any management training. The best training I had were probably from terrible people that I worked for, and I vowed that I would never, ever treat people the way that some managers had treated me. And yet at the same time, I had great managers who were good mentors and all of that. So you kind of learn by osmosis, but you make mistakes along the way. There's no doubt about it. But ultimately, I think where my management style evolved was I want to win ethically, and I want to treat people decently. You know, it's sort of like the golden rule of journalism, but you have to serve your community, and you have to do it with integrity.
Where did you get this integrity and ethics that kind of drove you?
You know, I think it goes back to, my dad was just a wonderful human being. I mean, I don't think he could have lied or cheated or stolen or done anything that would be out of bounds. And that was just the expectation. And then beyond that, every journalist I worked with, I can say that they had the same sense of integrity and duty and all of those things that go into being a good journalist.
One of the things you may be best known for is recruiting, mentoring, and training some of the best journalists in the market over a long period of time. You seem to have a knack for finding the best talent and then bringing them along to give them the best opportunity to develop.
One of the things, I thank you for that kind comment. One of the things I try to do is go out and find smart people. You start there. If somebody isn't smart, you don't have anything to work with.
But what's your criteria for smart people?
Oh, people who can think on their feet, people who are engaging, people who are funny. Funny people are usually smart people. I always have this feeling that, some of the hardest things in the world to do, it's to be funny. I mean, that's not easy, be funny on command. But what I mean is that you're somebody who can make a connection with another person. In journalism and news, it's all about making that connection, whether it's connection to the audience as an anchor, connection with a news source as a reporter, a connection with as a team that includes a producer and a reporter and photographer. It's all about those connections, and if you can't engage, you're not going to be very good at what you set out to do.
As a team leader in a newsroom such as Ketv, how do you impress basically younger people coming into the business with the importance of journalism to the community you serve?
It's just part of our DNA anymore. I'm not going to sit here and say that we do all nice, positive, great stories that make Omaha look dazzling to the outside world. Part of our job is to, afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. And because of that, you're going to ruffle some feathers. Any given day, the mayor will not like me, the governor will not like me, the U.S. senator from Nebraska will not like me. But that's okay, because I was not put on this earth to be liked by people that we have to talk to in a kind of a tough way. But beyond that, though, there are good things that are going on in the community, and you need to be a part of that, whether it's sponsoring events or going out and telling good stories about the community. It's the balance of the positive, the negative, and kind of the, who knows if it's a positive or negative story.
You've always been pretty aggressive in taking your newsroom people and having them out in the community at events, hosting events, emceeing events, being a part of the fabric of the community, and that's been important to you.
Yeah, it has, and it's something that I really learned early on. You can win viewers one at a time in Omaha. You work in New York City, it's a little too big to win over people one at a time. When I worked at KMTV, I did consumer advocate reporting, and I remember a consultant telling me overnight, he said, "I'm going to make you a star," which really irritated me, I must say. because I was a journalist. I wasn't a star. But what he was saying, that I later realized probably a long time after I had left, is that I was going to go out and connect with people and do stories that made a real difference to them. And what we were talking about was one person at a time. There were stories, some of the stories I covered, some people had a rat problem out in the back of their neighborhood, a rat problem. And I couldn't get out there. And I said, can you save the rats for me? Because we need to get some video. So thinking they'd have a couple of rats. I don't know what I thought they would do with them. Well, the photographer and I went out, and they had trash barrels full of rats. And they took the lids off, and it's like, oh, wow, you do have a rat problem. Well, we would go out, and then we would go to the proper authorities to get rid of the rats. And we did things, that wasn't the only type of thing we did, but we solved a lot of consumer problems, one person at a time. And literally, my phone rang off the wall. Everybody in town knew that I was the woman that was going to solve their problems.
Especially the rat problems.
Yeah, their rat problems. If
No
you have a
more
rat
rats.
problem, don't call me.
And ran the rats out of them all. That's something to be known for.
Really, Pied Piper.
Over the years, you've seen women take a larger role in this business. You've brought a number of them on. You've been pretty aggressive in hiring and training women and minorities at KETV. How'd that come about, and where did you find the people you're looking for?
Well, I hire a lot of people locally. I hire them from the University of Nebraska. I hire them from UNO. And I like people with local connections. It's not a given that you have to have that, but people are more likely to stay. When it comes to attracting women and minorities, I really feel like the newsroom needs to reflect the community. And that means you have to go out and find people who are going to reflect the community. And that includes you need some racial diversity, you need men and women, you need people of a certain age. You don't want all 21-year-olds, nor do you want all 60-year-olds in your newsroom. You want that mix so that you can see news from all of its perspectives.
Growing up, you and I grew up in an era where most of the TV anchors were male, had gray hair, were very formal, stentorian, if you will. That's all changed now, hasn't it?
Well, it has, but when I got into the business, I was joking with someone the other day that a guy came up to me on the street and he said, "You're Roseanne Peterson and you work over there at Channel 7 with Lee Terry." And I said, "You have just covered all three women who work in local television news, because I'm Roseanne Shannon, Ann Peterson works at WOWT, and Lee Terry is at Channel 7. So they had completely covered it. So in that guy's mind, there really was one person working at all three television stations. But you just have to get started. People don't see themselves in that role. I'm surprised I saw myself doing television news because there weren't many women doing it at the time. On a national level, there were probably a few. Locally, no. Sue Wolf was at KETV, and Ninette wasn't on the air much, and so that was about it. So
And Ann Shannon was doing sports.
Well, Ann came after me, and that was groundbreaking. Ann Shannon doing sports.
A woman sports reporter.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, once you bring these people in and you mentor them and you train them and they get really, really good, then they tend to move on.
Some do, some stay. We're very fortunate in the Hearst organization. KETV is one of the smaller stations, and within Hearst, one of the expectations is that if someone is good and wants to go to one of our stations in a larger market, we make that happen.
So you've sent people to Kansas City, Boston, Orlando. You have quite a few at Orlando.
Yeah, we call Wesh in Orlando KETV Southeast, because we've sent some really good people there. But they're very happy working there.
Who wouldn't be?
Yeah, who wouldn't be? But, they have a fondness for KETV. I hear from them.
And Roseanne Shannon.
Well, I hope so.
They absolutely do. You spend a lot of time working with other Hearst stations, other Hearst news directors. It's kind of a collegial relationship to make sure everybody benefits from the broad experiences you have?
Yeah, and you get something out of every person that you meet with. Even a brand new news director has some perspectives and knowledge of things that somebody in my position for 25 years doesn't have. But the Hearst news directors are a great group. When Pulitzer and Hearst were when we were transitioning to Hearst, I remember going to a meeting and I was so impressed by the Hearst news directors. They were a team and a force to be reckoned with, and we have a philosophy that's Hearst first, and what that means is that you will do anything to help the other Hearst stations before you serve the network. Before you do anything else, you help another Hearst station, and that extends to if there's a hurricane. We have what we call jump teams, and they go to the stations that need help. When we had the shootings at Von Mar, we had teams from Kansas City and Des Moines, and they brought equipment and reporters to help us out because you're in it for the long haul.
Having that kind of resource to rely on has got to be pretty exciting.
Yeah, it is. There's something about being part of an organization for whom journalism and television news is the number one product. And there's just no compromise on it. That's what we do. I mean, Hearst has a lot of other entities, but Hearst Television, we do news. We do television news. Now we do digital news, but we do news.
And they are committed to local news in each of their markets.
Absolutely. Local news, they understand the importance of it, and we get a lot of resources and encouragement, and they're just fabulous organization.
The phrase that seems to be integrity first, journalism is non-negotiable, something you live by.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the fastest way to get fired in the Hearst organization is to do something that's lacking in integrity. You can make mistakes, but you can't compromise those values.
You've also built a Washington bureau within Hearst that serves all the individual stations, but it gives you access to Nebraska lawmakers in Washington, D.C.
It does, and some of the bureau people are in South Korea right now covering the Olympics for us. But when things happen, when there were some issues about gun control and that just recently, we were able to get our elected officials here over to the Rotunda, the Capitol, and the Hearst teams were there to interview them. And we can get them to do various things for us. But what they try to do on a daily basis is to do stories that play across the country, but they're out of Washington.
And give them a local spin as well, local identification, that type of thing. Younger journalists today, it's a different breed than when you and I got into the business. Are the values the same? Do they still see things the way we did from a journalistic perspective, or has that evolved based on time, sensitivity, age, and even equipment technology?
Well, I think one of the biggest things, I'm not one of these people who say the good old days, they were so good.
They weren't.
They were fun. But people coming into journalism today work harder, and they have to be smarter. The workload, we used to have deadlines for individual newscasts, you had the 5 o'clock deadline, the 6 o'clock, the 10 o'clock deadline, and then, everybody left and went to the bar. What happens now is there are no deadlines. Every minute of the day is a deadline because of digital. And the expectations to do social media, all of that really puts a lot of pressure. So to say that, a lot of people always want to rap on millennials and they're not, they don't have these values. They do. What is different is that work-life balance is more important than perhaps it was to people when I was first coming up. And that's a challenge in a business that's 24/7, 365 days a year. I can't give you Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. I can't. You're going to work Christmas and that's just the way it's going to be. That's a tough sell to some people. And if you don't like that, then it's probably not the business for you.
You bring people on board and try to impress them with the fact that it is a 24/7 business. You spend more time with the people in your newsroom than you do with your family at home. And you get very attached, and you actually have to deal with that. And sometimes it's tough on a home life. You've been fortunate.
Oh yeah, I've been very fortunate. I very early on in my career married a photographer from the Omaha World Herald, and which in and of itself presents some interesting challenges on a competitive front. I was telling somebody today that I knew my husband was going somewhere. And that there was a war going on in the Middle East, when he came to me and said, "Do you know where my passport is?" And I said, "Are you going somewhere?" And, that it's a competitive issue. He's not going to tell me that he's heading off to,
You didn't hand him a camera and said, "Send me some tape."
No, that isn't going to happen. But that was the trade-off. The good part about it is that we understood that somebody might not be there for Thanksgiving or Christmas because we had to work.
Stories needed to be covered.
Yeah, exactly.
What was the biggest story you've ever covered personally? The most emotional, the most important?
Oh, there have been so many, but if you'd indulge me with just a couple, the 1975 tornado was defining for me in many ways. We were down covering the city council meeting, and when I walked into the building, it was it wasn't a hot day, but there was something about it. And I said to my photographer, Roger Pry, "We're going to have a tornado today." And he just ignored me, and we went about our business. And about 4:30, the news director called and said, "There's a big tornado that's just hit southwest Omaha, and you guys need to get out there." So we got on the interstate, which was probably the dumbest thing we ever did. And the tornado was so large that it passed right in front of us, but you couldn't see it because it was just all this brown debris, and it was pretty harrowing. So we decided that we were going to get out at the first place that we saw damage, and we did, and people were literally coming out of their basements to nothing. They'd walk up steps, and there was nothing. There was no roof, there was no walls, there's just debris everywhere. And I realized at that point, and I hadn't been in news for very long, just a couple of years, and I realized at that point that television is so powerful and such a touchstone for people, because they saw us with a camera. They knew that we were in their living room every night. We had some sort of credibility. I'm not quite sure what it was, but they kept asking us, where is my son? What's happening? And it to be put in, we had gone through that, not quite in the same way they had in losing their homes, but we had gone through that, and we were kind of shell-shocked when we got there. But you realize you had to buck up and start reporting and actually be that touchstone so that people could have some sort of solace. It's funny how that happens, and I've seen that happen time and time again in my career. I think, if you fast forward to 9/11, it was that same feeling. The story is so overwhelming, you think, I can't cover this. It's too much. How do I even cover this? At the same time that you are devastated by what's happening as well. But you figure out a way and you start doing it. But I just remember the calls to the newsroom, just endless calls at 9/11. People they wanted to help. They were distraught. This kind of stuff goes on all the time. Most people, I don't know, wouldn't think to call a newsroom. I wouldn't. I would now. But I would never have thought to call a newsroom and tell my problems or ask for help or any of that. And people do it because they know we can get something done, and we are that touchstone.
And you're a voice that will talk to them.
Right, and we are the voice for people who might not have a voice.
I asked you earlier how well you remember the Kennedy assassination and the coverage that went along with that, and did that influence the way you see things? Does it give you a different lens to look at this through?
I don't know if it really changed the way I look at things, but I do remember it. I was a kid at the time, and obviously the entire nation was glued to their television sets.
It was the first television event.
Yeah, really, and for days on end, and they watched Ruby kill Oswald on live TV on Sunday morning, and I was there, and I know my mother wasn't too happy about that we had witnessed it, but it happened. But it again, when you play it back, you realize that influence that television had, and I don't know if it influences what I do today, but I always have felt the power of breaking news and the ability of strong anchors and strong reporting to provide answers, to hold people accountable, and to give people the information they need to move on.
Well, you're a seasoned veteran journalist, but you're bringing along these newbies, people who have not experienced everything you've experienced. And I asked you earlier, too, you ever come into a situation where one of your people goes out and, for instance, covers their first fatality that they've been exposed to, and how they come back from that?
Well, some people can compartmentalize. I'm pretty good at it. Some people are not. And so it varies. Your reaction is as varied as the people that you have in front of you. But yeah, it really disturbs some people. And there are organizations that encourage you to find psychological help for and counseling for people who have experienced a traumatic event. They say some reporters suffer from PTSD, and that's probably true. I found for myself that the best way to handle those situations is it's happening to them, you're reporting on it, your life is fine. And that's how you get through it. Many people in many occupations have to do that. First responders, doctors, it happens. But it doesn't go away. I mean, you remember things. And again, very early in my career, I remember covering a fire where some kids had pushed a bed. It was in OHA housing. They pushed a bed against the wall, and they started playing with matches, and the room caught on fire. And the fire department couldn't get in before at least one of the children, as I recall, died. And the firefighter came out, and you can I can still see the image. He had this little bundle and a blanket, and you could see smoke coming off of that. And he handed it off to a paramedic, and they put the baby in the squad. And that firefighter sat down on the curb and cried. And that happens to you, and you don't really fully process it, I think, sometimes. But it never gets out of your head. I mean, there's some things you can't unsee.
One of the big parts of your career has been the campaign to get cameras into courtrooms. Where'd that start, and why was that so important to you?
Well, it's really interesting. Cameras have been in the Iowa courtrooms for nearly 40 years, and on the 25th anniversary of Cameras in the Courtroom in Iowa, there was a big celebration, and I'm the media coordinator for Cameras in the Courts in Southwest Iowa. So I was invited over to Drake, and we had panels, and one of the justices from the Iowa Supreme Court said to me, I was one of the original people who allowed cameras in the courtroom, and Ninette Beaver just went up to him one day and said, I think we should be able to shoot this. Can we get a camera in? And he started thinking about it and said, well, I don't think there's any reason why you can't. So I started thinking about that, and when Norm Krivosha was the Chief Justice of the Nebraska Supreme Court, he allowed cameras in the Nebraska Supreme Court, and we thought, we're in now. We get them in the Supreme Court, we're good. Well, that was not to be because Norm Krivosha left, and there were some Chief Justices that didn't want cameras in the courtroom, and we would talk to them, and they'd be very nice, and But Mike Hevikin came along, and he was very receptive. And without him and without some key judges and people from the Supreme Court, this wouldn't have happened. There were a few of us in the media, Bill Kelly from NET and I, and Janet Bancroft from the Supreme Court, and now Justice Funk from the Nebraska Supreme Court. He was a Sarpy County judge, and Judge Todd Hutton in Sarpy County. All were really active in trying to get the cameras in, and we worked and tried to change hearts and minds and prove that we weren't evildoers and all of that sort of thing. And I think we finally did. We're in a pretty good spot now. We have things that we need to work on, but we're gonna it's good, and it's gonna get better.
Do you think your longevity in the news media helped with that, the fact that you've known most of these judges for many years, and they've known you, so maybe there was a degree of trust there.
Yeah, I think it does help, and I have to give Bill Kelly credit for that as well. Bill worked for WOWT when I was working for KM and KE, and he's been really relentless too. So the two of us have worked really hard, as have others, but I think we've been in it for the long haul. And I find even over in Iowa, if people trust you and they know that you're not going to pick up a camera and wander around the courtroom and move microphones and be excessively disruptive, you can convince them that this isn't something they need to fear. And the transparency that you get, we cover so much court news that I think it's really important to have the cameras in and to show people what's going on. They can't get down there. It's not like the old days where everybody showed up for the Scopes trial at the courthouse.
And most people, the only thing they see of courtrooms is on television, as far as the Perry Mason, that type of thing.
Yeah, and then that's not realistic. And, one of the things that the judges worried about, and we kind of got it off the table right away, in a big trial, big case, what's it going to be like? Is it going to be a circus? Because they always bring up the Sam Shepard case, and it's like, oh my goodness. But we had Nico Jenkins in court very, very early on, after we got cameras in the courtroom, and the judge in the case was really good to work with, and nothing bad happened. Nico Jenkins, for the most part, we were very careful because he had a kind of a history of outbursts in the courtroom. If he did something just disruptive, that was just what happened, but we did put it on a delay because of the possibility of profanity. And I was in charge personally of the button because I didn't want to leave that to chance.
Ultimate responsibility. Would that be the landmark achievement, you think, of your legacy as a journalist, the cameras in the courtroom in Nebraska?
It'd be a pretty big one. Yeah, I don't know. There's so many things, but I guess when you work on something for so long and so hard that, you have to say it was worth it. And the thing that's kind of interesting about it, getting cameras in the courtroom did not make our lives easier. Made it much more difficult, to be quite honest about it, because we have to devote a lot of resources and time to getting the cameras in. But I think it was right for the viewer. And I think it will give them a better understanding of what goes on in the courts. And ultimately, it will be right for the courts, too.
As the leader of your news organization, when things go wrong, you're the one that ends up getting the blame. But when things go right, you don't like to take the credit. You share the credit. But Murrow Award, National Edward R. Murrow Awards, Omaha Press Club Hall of Fame, UNO School of Journalism Hall of Fame, Nebraska Broadcasters Association Hall of Fame. And when you walk into 7 Burlington Station, there's a big display case. And in that display case are Emmy statues. How does that make you feel?
Makes me feel pretty good, but I know that I did it as part of a team. I didn't do it on my own. Some of those awards that I've gotten, the Nebraska Broadcasters Hall of Fame was really, really important to me because being recognized by your peers. And, it seems to me, even though it's been 45 years, it doesn't seem that long, that, I go back and I think, if only I could be like that person or that person. And then all of a sudden you're there and you are that person. It's pretty cool. But my husband and I laughed about the Omaha Press Club Hall of Fame Award. Once we got over laughing, we were inducted together. We are the only couple who has ever been inducted. And we joked that either they had run out of people to give the award to, or perhaps it took 2 of us to get enough good things going to get 1 award. So we joked about it, but we were inducted with some of one of our college professors, and I had to make the remark. I said, I bet when we were in school here, you would not have ever anticipated that we would be award winners with you.
Well, history making in so many ways, your career has really been important to journalism in this community and in this state. You feel like you're leaving it in good hands?
Oh, absolutely. KETV is in a wonderful spot where ratings are a reflection of how you're serving the community and the type of journalism you're doing. But we're number one across the board, and
Top 10 of ABC affiliates across the country.
No, our 10 o'clock news is the number one ABC affiliate in the country, and a lot of our newscasts have been right up there. So that's a very telling thing. I used to just kind of ignore it because I didn't understand it, but it is really important. And there are good people. One person does not make a newsroom. That has always been the case, and it will continue to be the case. And I wouldn't be leaving if I didn't think that it was time for the next generation to take it over.
Well, because of your mentoring and training, it looks like they are ready to take it on.
Well, I hope so. I think they are, and I think you're going to see even better journalism, and I think viewers are not going to miss me one iota.
I doubt that very much. I know your crew at KETV will miss you more than one iota. Congratulations on an astounding career.
Thank you. Thanks.
Our subject today, Ann Shannon, news director at KETV Newswatch 7. She is in the midst of retirement. This has been a production of UNO Television and the Nebraska Broadcasters Association History Project.